I see a very clear solution, but you need to be allowed to say that solution, because what you said before is they cannot do the learning because they are dealing with bad decisions they made in the past. And that's exactly where you need to start the learning, because it's the bad decisions you made in the past that are the absolute source of your learning. And so that's what I mean with go into the operational complexity. Don't be afraid of that operational complexity. Bring it up, bring it to the front. And because you're going to solve direct needs, something that's really hurting in real time.
So, Mixel, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thanks for making time for another call. I really enjoyed the last one and had some feedback from others as well. They found it very interesting. And we were just getting to know each other, and we covered quite a few topics. But one thing that stood out for me and caught my interest during that call was to understand more about your background and experience in creating learning organizations. And I know primarily you had experience of that within an academic context. So I wanted to hear from you a bit more about that, about what actually happened, the challenges you were trying to solve, and the outcomes you achieved from that. What's followed on since in terms of your own thinking on the basis of that experience. And I'd also like today to then bring the focus round to more towards organizations in general, and this challenge we see in the world today around the necessity for a continuous investment in learning on the part of the individual and the organization as a whole. And what, if anything, from your experiences might inform others who are looking how to grow learning organizations to help people learn in an engaged and effective way.
Yeah, okay. So let me then start with a bit of background. So I come with a background of software development, and I've been asked by the Department of Economics to help business students cope with the complexity of software development. So that was the setting. So now the first year that was in the context of the master after master. So that's real business people in the field. They understood the complexity of the reality they were working with. So I started with trying to model that complexity to a way that it becomes approachable. And later on, it became part of the more technical version of an MBA. It's called Master in Business and Technology. So it's not just business administration, but it's going deeper into the technology. And so I had students, business students, that needed to understand software, and therefore they actually started to program. And the funny outcome of the experiment was that many of the business students started creating code that was better than we expected from the software students, and that was like a real eye-opener. I think that if you start thinking about what the idea of a learning organization, there's a lot of misconceptions around that it's costly, takes a lot of time. In my own experience, it's really about a mental change, shift in mindset more than actually providing the time. It's more about the awareness and the way you approach the thing. So the first way we actually started doing really research on it is that I was involved with an actual startup ecosystem where the things were happening in reality. But that gave me a direct connection with the entrepreneurs and understand the whole complexity happening there. And I was interested in how that business agility was being happening on top of that development agility. And my main question was, how can I actually learn to create like education agility from it? So how do I take what's interesting over there and put it in a context purely on learning. So it was really learning like you have at the university, a full year course. And the challenge was learn how to deal with the complexity of software development. So it's not so much making them programmers, right? Because that's a very different challenge. And there is no real course you can have on that. So I was left open to try and experiment anything I wanted. And I've been focused there on the concept of peer learning, because I mean, first of all, well, the internet is there, everything becomes digital. You see that the way we did classical education doesn't work anymore now. I mean, if you have just one person giving a really, really good lecture, you record it, you put it online, and it's available for everyone. So, okay, so that's pretty disruptive to the way education has been going on. So how do you play with that? And the way I started playing with that is actually giving full information overload to the students. So 20 students, full information overload, see how they sink or swim. And go in a dialogue with them to figure out like, okay, so what is the difficulty you're having here? Yeah, there's too much information, I can't do it all. Yeah, but is that, where are you focusing on? What's your driver? Where are you going? What do you want? And by cultivating it that way, we actually start adding many of the things we know from agile development, like continuous exploration, but also continuous development, continuous evaluation. All of this was added into the course. So it changed the course radically, because normally at university you have the lectures, then in the end you have an exam, but now it became projects. And the first thing I asked students to do is put your soul into it. I want a project that really can you can wake up for in the morning. And it's kind of funny, because first time, of course, all of them were afraid, and they came back with a silly, simple project. Only the people who were passionate about digital projects already gave a very good first start. But most of them, I just saw they didn't have the passion. So I sent them back, and sometimes several times, because they had like I'm going to give you one concrete example. There was someone and said like, yeah, but my only passion are horses. So I said like, okay, let's work with horses. We'll see where we get it. I don't know where we're going to get it. The idea is to be a journey, to understand how your passion can actually be digitally enhanced. How are you going to do that? And like there's one I mean, I was so surprised about. There was she was only interested in nice clothing. That's it. She was a fashionable woman. But in the end, we ended up with like a digital online wardrobe, and it was so much fun. Everyone was playing with it. I mean, there was like one of the projects that could actually end up being a startup. And I had like my more business-oriented, more entrepreneurial-oriented students. They would actually go and find venture capital to make the project they had actually their business. So, but it's all about changing the mindset. So, I mean, I'm gonna give it back to you to see how this responds to.
Well, I appreciate the example, and what it brings to mind for me is the importance of meaningfulness in whatever it is that we're doing. And this question in the context of organizations around how do you, one, attract people who are resonant with the purpose of the organization to begin with. So already there's some kind of connection. And secondarily, how do you take advantage of people's unique passion, interests, and skills once they're in an organizational system so that they can be in an environment that's most meaningful for them somehow, and at the same time the organization is benefiting most because, as you say, it's something the person wants to get up for in the morning and go beyond the call of duty to be able to do, because there's a reciprocity there that benefits both the organization and the individual. So that's where I'm at.
Well, that's an That's interesting because I've noticed that there's a very different way organizations look at talent than what I've observed in the startup ecosystem. I mean, there's like this very common idea that talent are young people who are very flexible and so on. But that's not at all what I've observed in reality. What I've observed in reality was like these 40-year-old people who were extremely stubborn, but extremely passionate. For example, I'm going to give one example, multilingual. So whatever topic you were talking with them, after 5 minutes, they turn it into multilingual. I was crazy that someone was capable of doing that. But because they are so passionate about that small problem, it's a competitive advantage. And a competitive advantage from a business perspective, that's what you want. Competitive advantage, hard to trade, because that stubborn, talented person wouldn't trust anyone except the people he already was trusting. So you saw that the entrepreneur who was nurturing an environment fit for, so the organizational environment fit for that talent, was actually the startup that would be effective in the ecosystem. And what we've noticed is that when the ecosystem really became very honeypot, let's say, and in 2010, that's the big corporates came in, and everything changed. Everything changed. So I've been looking at like, okay, so how is learning in big organizations different from the jungle we saw in such startup ecosystems? And how does that actually start aligning? How can you actually make the one work for the other? And I mean, that's actually the way I actually got into contact with S3. That's because what I saw is that people were using S3 as a way to create safety and structure for them to be able to actually start becoming passionate. So it's not that they started from passion, but it's more that they create structures to allow them to open up the passion. I don't know what your experience is there, but.
Well, I think we're reversing backwards into a growing collective realization of the importance of meaningfulness in what it is that we're doing, and the price we pay when people are working in an environment or just living in an environment where they don't feel some personal resonance with the purpose of that environment. And so maybe in the past that mattered less because organizations could get away with it anyway. But these days, if we look at the issues around talent and the dependency on talent and engagement in organizations, for organizations to remain competitive and relevant within the context that they're operating in, it becomes increasingly important to match members of an organization with the purpose of the organization to start with. So like I say, the recruitment. And these days, I often hear customers talking about being in an applicant's market because they're having to present themselves in a manner that would be attractive enough to the talent for them to come on board in the organization. And if the organization doesn't meet their whims and fancies adequately, then they're going to head off to another organization, to a competitor instead, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah. So it really makes sense these days for organizations to focus on that recruitment step with much more attention than maybe they have in the past. Yeah. And to find people who are a good fit for the system to start with, which predicates on being really clear on the purpose of your organization. Yeah. And it predicates upon being able to offer people who are considering to come on board with the organization an environment that's going to be nourishing for them as people, as well as an opportunity for them to explore their interests, their passion, bringing their soul into it, as you say. And what I've seen is, for example, a customer I worked with previously, they set themselves up in a manner to be extremely attractive for young developers. Yeah. In creating this impression, come here and this is the organization of your dreams. You can have anything you want. And for a while, that worked because there was a product that was successful. But as the organization grew, you ended up with the members of the organization holding the organization to ransom on this expectation, really, of the organization being like a parent to their kind of unmet childhood somehow. And it began to jeopardize the effectiveness of the organization. And what happened at a certain size, and I think this is a pattern we can see in many examples, is that the necessity for a more kind of clear management hierarchy, a more command and control became evident. And so the whole environment was disrupted through bringing in a strict management hierarchy, which disrupted trust through the system and upset everybody, and impacted the organization in an even more negative way. So I'm just giving an example of where this becomes increasingly important to consider. And when you're a startup, you've got a great idea, maybe it's already got some interest in customers and generating revenue perhaps, then you might not be so focused on the importance of this area of like well-being of the people, but finding a balance between the people working in the organization and the needs of the organization itself. But if an organization is successful and it grows in some way as a consequence of that, then at some point, sooner or later, people bump into this issue. And it's so much harder retrospectively to bring in the strategies and the approaches for supporting everyone then to learn how to deal with this environment vis-a-vis doing it from the start. So there's a number of things, just to summarize.
There are many things.
Appropriate recruitment to start with. You've got putting in place the infrastructure necessary at the beginning to facilitate learning. You've got the importance of an environment that's nourishing for the people who are working there, and adequate sense of ownership and involvement that they can flourish in some way. You've got the need of ensuring people who bring talent into the system, whether that's the young university graduates or that's the post-40 stubborn people like me, who are, just got very kind of, I forget how you put it now, like a specific skill set or competence, right? And taking advantage of that in a way that's good for them and for the organization. And I see this as just a whole field of consideration that we need to be mindful of in organizations. And I think it's only recently that in many cases people are becoming aware of this area of need. And so this is where I think the future lies in putting in place infrastructure early on to enable a learning organization from the beginning.
But the thing is that if you're dealing with complexity, the only constant is change. The example you gave is you see the one bad decision on the other being topped on each other because they were still operating in like a complicated world and not in a complex world, and everything changes if you need to think in a complex world instead of a complicated world, because everything is in change and everything is pivoting, and you so how do you deal with that if you cannot work on it?
Just clear, in this example, they were in a complex environment. They had an extremely successful product with an enormous revenue, and there was 120 people at the time working in that organization. And the reason it had got away with that until now was because there was a high level of autonomy through the system, right? But the problem was they'd arrived at a point where there was new products coming online, there was dependencies, there was limitations on resources and so on, and a pull on resources and dependencies that were unmet, and there was nothing in place to help people move beyond the kind of autonomous silos, right, towards a more coherent approach across the system.
But that's kind of you kind of in my view you're showing it again, because the problem is there will always be some distortion. So resilience is the essence, right? You really need to figure out how to get the resilience going, because when you're dealing with complexity, anything goes basically.
Sure.
But what I've seen is that if the way you describe it, I see that the way they take the decision already includes the failure. It's like a failure by design. Because, and I've seen it before, like the nice thing of doing participation research is that people don't really know who you are. And you can actually just learn the real what's happening. Because if you come there as an authority, they will not be react the same. They will react different. And like if I see these emerging startup ecosystems, they are like jungles. It's anarchy. It's crazy, and it's tough. It's so tough. You don't get in there because there's a lot of opportunity. You get in there because there's a lot of necessity. And fast forward to understanding the more structured organizations understand the need for talent, so they start creating these incubators, and they throw parties in the incubator to try to attract the talent. But that's not a talent. I've talked to a lot of people. What they attract are followers, not leaders. And it's a very different mindset. And the thing is that what I've seen is also that sometimes, I've seen that with family companies where there's a lot of locked up talent. But instead of then understanding the power they have internally and trying to understand how to activate their talent, they just go into a recruiting sphere and just throw out the whole culture, which is like, no, that's the thing that was your power. And so, I mean, I'm going back to my course, because the thing is that, so when I inherited the course, no one wanted to teach it. It was the worst course of all. They didn't know how to get those business students interested in something as complicated as software development. But the problem is that the way they made the frame was totally wrong, because they said like, okay, we're going to help you learn how to deal with the complexity of software development. And by the way, here you're going to do a classical programming course. And I had something like, wait, now you're training them to become a programmer. They will learn nothing about dealing with complexity. And so if you kind of open it up and you keep the target, change the plan, right? That's the essence. Well, whatever happens, go into a dialogue with what you have. And from a strategic point, I very see this disconnection, where they make strategic decisions without it really being rooted in the actual complexity, operational complexity. Well, what I've really learned is it's in the operational complexity that the potential is hidden.
Can you just expand on that a bit to see what you mean by that?
Well, I'm gonna give you. I've actually tried for a few companies to give a workshop to try to get the collective unconsciousness to the front. And in all the cases, what they actually realized is they were themselves the thing that's blocking them. I'm going to give an example. There was this search engine optimization company, right? And they had a lot of dialogue with their customer. But therefore, they actually said, actually, we understand the culture of the customer better than the customer themselves. So it was something like, so why don't you start helping them with it? And they realized like, okay, but we can just do the consulting part and help them do the change management, because we are rooted everywhere. And then they realized that, you know what? I've always have this call with the clients. I just ask this few questions in the end. And so they just knew that the very small steps in their operations would actually allow them to grow out of their limitations. And the same was with, there was a startup. So it was a successful startup software company. And they realized that they were growing and they had this grow pain. So there was way more people coming in, but the way they used to work didn't work anymore because they were too big. But they were too small to actually go to like this big enterprise resource planning systems. So they were like in between there, and they didn't know how to cope with that. And then the only thing they actually realized during the workshop is they are programmers. They could just create their solution. They could program the thing themselves. And it was like really very, very, how do I say that? Daily problems like getting the sandwiches during lunch and realizing they could actually link it to what's it called again, the Slack has these localization parts, so they could actually ask only the people who were in, and the programmer knew how to program that. So it was like no effort at all. So it wouldn't be an overload for all the people who wouldn't be at the desk. And so they came up with solutions just on the fly like that. And so that's what I mean. Like it's the goal is at the operational complexity, but what organizations have learned to do with operational complexity is push it down, break it up in small, easy things, and they don't really see the synergies and the serendipity that's hidden in it.
Sure. Well, I mean, a metaphor for that, I'd see the soil with all of these seeds in it and all of this potential. Yeah, but they're focused on trying to look after the single tree that's growing on the land right now and missing the potential that lies distributed through the system. And you're talking about complexity, and we can have an approximate idea of where we think we might want to head, or a particular challenge or opportunity we want to respond to in some way. But ultimately, it's about emergence, right? And being in service of what emerges. And what you're saying is that it's helpful for organizations to recognize the abundance of seeds in the soil, aka lying within each of the individuals in the system, not necessarily be entirely attached on what they believe the organization's purpose is today and the particular challenges and opportunities it's responding to, but to really take advantage of this opportunity to evolve and grow into something that's perhaps entirely unexpected and far beyond anything that was conceived of yesterday. Something like this. And that for me, I think is a really important message for people in organizations to be thinking about today. And my critique of the company, the example I gave, but I can think of others as well, is that there's this tendency when vulnerable towards more centralization and control, and in doing so, you limit even more the potential to harness that value that's lying distributed among the people. And it requires it's a paradoxical point of view, because what you're saying is you discovered, no, rather than centralize more, is like invite, facilitate, enable people to inquire into their own contribution, their own ideas, their own innovation, and to be able to harness and synergize that in ways that benefits both the people and the organization.
But there's an interesting paradox there, because if you distribute, there's always another kind of hierarchy. There, you cannot escape it. And what I've noticed is that if the hierarchy becomes informal, it's even harder and tougher. It's really becomes a difficult environment, because if you get into it, you don't know the informal hierarchy. And when things get distributed, that actually can happen. And one of the things you learn in there is that we are all the bottleneck. We are all the limitation. So the question is, how do you, in a distributed way, make sure that what you can propagate, you propagate? And so I actually seen that with the course that I've been running. It was a huge success, that trying to get them put their soul into the project. But you get to a new bottleneck, because suddenly you move from being the teacher who could teach to 300 students to a coach, and you cannot coach 300 students, or at least not without a new hierarchy.
So maybe just before because I think it's useful you unpack how you solve that problem. But I just want to back up for a minute and on this question of the shifting to an informal hierarchy and the problems that come with that. It's a both and, right? It's like you need coherence, whatever you're doing. You need an approximate direction of some kind or other in a system, no matter how distributed or centralized you are. Being unattached to the outcomes that come about and being open to learn from whatever happens in your best attempts to orientate in a direction is useful. and we can decentralize and distribute or centralize according to need. And the other thing on that is that there's always an informal hierarchy in the system, right? There's always a formal hierarchy, and one or other is either more or less explicit somehow. And so I think being clear on, well, if we talk about heterarchies rather than hierarchies, that's useful for a start, right? So enabling micro hierarchies to manifest within the system around need, but not to become concretized and limiting to the system. And at the same time, enabling as much as possible the informal hierarchies in the system and the informal relationships through the system. So that
I actually believe that if there is like a synchronicity between if there are two different hierarchies, there's something wrong. In my view, but that's just my interpretation of it, is there's only one real hierarchy, and that's a sense-making hierarchy. And if you are capable of actually making that in a formal way, everyone can play the game.
Yeah.
Well, if the power of the sense-making is in the informal hierarchy, only the people who are coped in can play the game.
Yeah. Well, maybe this segues with something I said in our last call, perhaps these three views on the organization we pretend exists in terms of how power to influence is distributed, the organization as it really exists, and the organization that wants to exist. And I'm of the opinion that unless you're explicit and clear on the organization as it really exists in terms of how power to influence is distributed, then you can't consciously be in service of an evolutionary system, that will be fit for purpose and can evolve in a manner that remains fit for purpose over time. So I think that's what you're saying by informal hierarchy. You mean the actual hierarchy that's there in the system in terms of who scratches whose back, who has influence, and who takes care of what, and being aware of incoherence between that and the kind of formal hierarchy that everybody says exists, but doesn't really reflect the actuality.
Well, the thing is, if it doesn't reflect it, you have a lot of work to catch up.
Yeah, or to uphold the illusion, right?
But then you're losing a lot of energy in a direction that's not really fit to the goal of the driver of the organization. But if because with the complexity, you see that it's always changing. So it's normal that the formal and informal hierarchy will deviate a little bit, but that's the essence. As soon as you see that doing, you start needing to make work of making sure that it will actually align again. But I think that's the coherence part.
Yeah. Well, this is S3 in practice, right?
But there's another part of
structural change grows out of need, and out of recognition that things are changing.
There's another part that I really like on the S3 way of doing that we didn't touch yet, because there's this it's also distributed, and I've heard people call that the multi-channel interface. So what you get is that depending on your needs, you can actually go into it from a different angle. So we all need to go to the source, right? But we can all go from different angles. And where are you now in your organization, in your needs? And what's the most needed step to take? And I've actually been playing with that with the students' agility, so the educational agility as well. I've learned, for example, in the second year, I was really struck with a gender problem. I didn't see that one coming, right? But then I realized, if you can kind of have many ways you can go, they will actually take the most appropriate way for them. And once they start moving, it's by moving that you enhance the path. So it's a journey again. But you need to get them moving. And it's kind of, I think it's probably something much to our culture of individualized beings to have a problem with that kind of structure. We talked before that I had this interaction with on a trading mission to China, and I learned there that many of the things I was doing around collective intelligence for them was very intuitive. Should I explain it a bit, or?
Well, we were gonna open up another call around this, I think, weren't we? At some point? But,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so say what you think is relevant, Mixel, and then.
Well, I think the relevant part is about you need to see the difference between intuitive and counterintuitive. And counterintuitive often means that there's something in your culture or your experience that actually has created this blockade to this path forward. And what you see is that the challenge we have today with platforms, with what the way the internet has forced us to change, is that we need to start becoming collective intelligence. And the step from being collective as a community to collective intelligence is a natural, intuitive step. But if you are a culture of very individual people and then going to a collective intelligence, that's a very counterintuitive step. And I guess that every organization you get in, you actually see those things that are intuitive and those things that are counterintuitive. And for the intuitive part, you just need to give them space to start doing it. Mm-hmm. But for the counterintuitive part, you need to create instructional scaffolds. You need to help make them the first steps, and as soon as they start doing the first steps, it starts moving.
Yeah, and I guess in the West, if I generalize broadly, we're quite an individualized culture, right? There's quite strong individualism, and if I think of would it be fair to say in a lot of more traditional organizations where you've got more centralized decision making and coordination in the system, that when you endeavor to make a pivot towards more distributed influence through the system, you're going to be up against the learning need to understand why that's relevant and helpful. And you're going to often be up against people who are used to being on either side of that dynamic, either the delegator or the delegatee, right? Mm-hmm. Who's one's used to being subservient to the other, whether they like it or not, and the other is used to having control. And so it's really important in my experience to, well, as human beings, we often open to learning at a moment when it's become so painful and unbearable that we realize that there needs to be something else. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because I don't believe it has to be like that. Yeah. But we can really dig in sometimes. But this is why, for me, I've increasingly found myself pointing out the necessity of leading with need, because as traditional organizations bump into the limitations of that system and recognize the need for something different, and individuals become humble and realize, well, despite my best efforts, and often their congruent good intention, it's inadequate to respond to the complexities that we face, therein lies a kind of opening in the door to start introducing the concept of collective intelligence and helping people to begin to understand why it's not only a good idea, but it's absolutely necessary at this time. And culturally, I was in China sharing about S3, and you're absolutely right. The idea of collective intelligence is it's intuitive to them. It's like they recognize themselves, an individual, generally speaking, recognizes themselves as part of a greater whole and feels an enormous allegiance to the system itself somehow. Mm-hmm. Whereas for us here, we might see that as some kind of like some kind of threat to our sovereignty and individuality. It's an interesting polarity. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anyway, listen, what I'd like to do is bring us back around to a couple of things that would be great to cover in this call. One is to hear a kind of high level summary of what actually happened in this experiment with these students, and how you managed to scale yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Coach, in a manner where that so many people could learn together. Because as I understand it, that's no small thing to support 600 students as one kind of catalyst for that, right? Mm-hmm. And you've achieved that somehow. And then I'd like to come around to this question of how this relates, what we can learn about that in terms of growing learning organizations in general. Yeah. Okay.
So I can actually link it back to what I just said about sense-making hierarchy. I think one of the great challenges we are facing, and definitely in Europe, It's to scale with diversity, scale with complexity. And the only way you can do that is you start playing with that. So we had a plan, we had a target, but we didn't really know how it would evolve. And one of the first things I learned there is that you can actually, if you start playing with masses, with large amount of people, you actually get a lot of psychological effects as a benefit. For example, I mean, I asked 3,000. 3,000. No, that's sorry. I'm thinking about the China project, but that's going to be for another call. We had 300 students, 600 in total, but 300 actually only start interacting with us. So 300 students, and you give them just an empty plate, and you say, "This is a challenge." The only people who actually can act to that are autodidacts. But in a group of 300 students, you have like 6 of them. So you have 6 people coming to the front, and they start doing it, showing how it can be done. And you coach them, right? But you coach them under the spotlight of the other 300 students. So what happened is like this cascade effect, because you get those 20 students who just needed one example, and they say, "Oh, okay." So then they start acting. But of course, those 20 can't get to the front. So you need a digital platform for them to start doing that. And you need rules that need to be explained up front. I mean, all of them actually is still available on my YouTube channel. I just kept them there. But so what happened is that like the snowball effect happened. First, the autodidact, then the students who need one example, and then the bigger, the early majority, the late majority, and eventually when everyone was moving, the laggers had to follow as well. So it like pulls everything on it. And so what happened is that I coached that first team, and I'm going to scale that part in a digital way. So what happened is that those students showed how it worked. And now the next challenge was they need to actually coach other students. So do the peer review. But you don't know if the peer review meets the criteria I put at front, I need to maintain. So what happened is I start watching the reviews instead of giving the reviews. But by watching the reviews, I start realizing who are good reviewers. So I approach them and ask them to become my assistant. And then you see the hierarchy. It's like a pop-up hierarchy that just pops up for that specific course, for that specific time. And so I had like this 60 student assistants who would do, check the reviews, and I would check them. So that's what I mean. It's still a hierarchy. But what I've just learned is that instead of, as coach doing all the coaching, I would simply focus on the hard parts. So, and those were like the best project and the worst project, while the biggest part in between just would self-organize. No, sorry, there's a cuckoo going on in the back. I'm gonna do something about that next time.
You should keep it. I like it.
It's distracting, but okay. Okay, so is that clear, or should I?
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really clear. And of course, I'm always bringing this back to other organizational contexts.
Notice I became a manager, right? In the whole process, I was a manager, educational manager.
You became a manager, but you were a facilitative leader, right?
Yeah.
So you had an area of responsibility that you held onto throughout, which was like overall responsibility
for quality.
For the whole thing, right? And at the same time, you delegated influence as wide as possible, and a competence hierarchy emerged, and you found a way to interact with that to really identify where strengths lay, so that people, and then support people to step into those areas of strength and competence if they wanted to, I guess.
Yeah. I should ask that what also happened is that new problems would arise. There would like be a conflict between my assistants and the students. And I wouldn't know if that was right or not. So I would dive into the data and actually start creating new interfaces. So I would create interfaces for the assistants to have a better overview of the evaluation. So all the time there was this continuous development happening as well. So every new problem created a new software solution. But that's handy because you have the content management system to play with.
Yeah. So what interests me then about this, and maybe this is a way to start coming towards wrapping this call up, is the point in this case was learning itself in a way, right? So the people are there, they're on a course to learn, to come out at the end with some kind of experience and qualification or evidence of competence. In an organization, people are there to work towards delivering certain products and services. Right? And learning is a kind of, from one point of view, is a secondary necessity on that journey. Right? And so in many cases I've come across, there's a general argument there isn't time to invest in learning because I said this as we were preparing for the call, we're too busy dealing with the consequence of poor decisions in the past to be able to take the time out to learn how to make better decisions and organize more effectively, right? There's this vicious...
But do you see the paradox there? It's funny.
But the point I want to make is, or the question I want to ask is this, is if an organization, I mean, the people in the organization recognize the necessity of need, of learning, why that's so important and beneficial. And so if learning becomes a kind of key deliverable in itself, right, then how would you, if an organization said, okay, how do we go about facilitating this within our system? How would you take what you learned from this experience in the university and bring that into an organization? And let me say one more thing about this, right? Okay. So it never happened this year because of COVID, but I was due to speak at an HR conference in Switzerland. And I've been saying RH, the new HR, resourcing humans to resource themselves. And I think it's a key responsibility of HR in the future in traditional organizations to take hold of that beast and to become responsible for facilitating appropriate learning through the system. And you're an example of that, a response to that need in the project that you were part of, right? Because you took overall responsibility for facilitating learning through the system. But traditional organizations haven't necessarily understood the importance of continuous learning through the system and how to facilitate that in an effective way. So what would be your recommendation to people in organizations, generally speaking, around how to mobilize learning through the system in an effective and an appropriate way?
It's kind of a little side note there. I actually have been got the title Human Capital Strategy in an international consulting company who wanted to work on that. But the problem is that the story you tell is I mean, I see a very clear solution, but you need to be allowed to say that solution, because what you said before is they cannot do the learning because they are dealing with bad decisions they made in the past. And that's exactly where you need to start the learning, because it's the bad decisions you made in the past that are the absolute source of your learning.
Exactly.
And so that's what I mean with go into the operational complexity. Don't be afraid of that operational complexity. Bring it up, bring it to the front. And because you're going to solve direct needs, something that's really hurting in real time. But the biggest problem I see with the whole approach there is that you need to allow vulnerability. You need to allow being open, because what I see is that a lot of people will respond like with denying that there is a mistake, and stay with the pain instead of actually letting someone operate on it. You know, that's a little sad situation. So it's a way more a psychological issue than it's about resources or time or any of that, because actually you will make free resources. You will solve problems, but then you need to go to the real bad decisions and start talking about them. and understand and open that up and have from a peer perspective, peer feedback, suggestions how to do it differently. And then try it out with quick feedback and then see how, if that works, like start cultivating it.
Yeah, great. So it seems like we've come to a very similar conclusion, actually. So people often overlook the fact that navigate via tension means that when you feel tension because of a herd of elephants in the room, then being able to bring that into consciousness of the organizational system and whichever domain you're responsible for, and find stakeholders who have some kind of shared responsibility or are impacted around that, to be able to address it and find ways to learn through the experience to improve it is fundamental. And yet, so often I hear people say, well, we introduce navigate via tension and we visualize our work and we record drivers and so on. But there's this problem and there's this problem and there's this problem and there's this problem. And when I ask, where is that in your priorities on your backlog? They say, oh, it's not on the backlog.
We don't have time for that.
Exactly. Yeah. So helping people get that.
Yes, indeed.
Is an enormous catalyst for healthy change. Yeah. Fundamental. Yeah. Okay.
And what I've learned by the scale experiments on the platforms, if you actually start embedding that in the platform, it becomes resistance is futile because the system will just flow over you. It's the system itself that starts solving it, and that's fascinating. But that will go into another call, I guess.
Exactly. So, Mixel, let's move towards wrapping this up. First of all, where, if anywhere, can people find out more information about what you've been sharing about today?
That's a small thing. I actually, there were some people from First Call who approached me, and I'm talking to them now to actually do some videos and do quite some creative design system stuff around S3. So I'll hope to surprise you with that. And I encourage that. I mean, you can. I'm approachable. You can approach me, and we may actually start creating other interesting videos. I would love to do that. Have more distributed other videos to talk about things, because I guess it's a little bit concept of eating your own dog food. I guess there's an S3 pattern there, but I can't get to. Can you call it to me, because I don't. The fact that you need to preach what you do.
Yeah, be the change.
Be the change. Yeah. Okay. So in respect of be the change, I invite people to actually try to do other calls with me. I do have a YouTube channel and I push things over there. You can find me LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. I'm pretty present online.
Yeah. So I'll add the link to your YouTube channel once again in the description of this video. Okay. And any closing remarks from you? This call.
Well, again, it was inspiring. What I noticed is that when we start, I actually see this nice example of this dyadic consciousness happening between us all the time. I mean, maybe I should explain a little bit. It's like the most minimal kind of collective consciousness you can have. It's with two people. And what you see is that if you just are in an open-minded and interacting with them, it's in the process of talking to each other that you actually are learning at the same time. So what I see is that during this call, I've been able to imagine things and learn things in the process as well. And I think that's the essence of making the thing alive.
Yeah.
And So it was again a very, very nice dyadic consciousness that emerged. Yeah.
Okay. And for me, I'm bingo on that. That's my experience too. And as you know, we're developing the S3 online learning community now. And one of the reasons I was so motivated to do that is my frustration of having conversations like this, one-on-one, and then no means to share it with others. And of course, we can record the call and we can put it on our largely unwatched YouTube channels, and maybe one day more people will access that. But the learning community is drawing people together who have a kind of common interest here. And then it's a way to share conversations like this with others so that as many people as possible can benefit. And I think this segues back for me around this whole notion of learning organizations, and how do you harness value that emerges through the learning from interaction between two or more people in a certain context, and distribute it in a way that's as relevant and valuable to others as well. So we don't have people in silos reinventing the wheel. We can be inspiring one another and helping that emergent knowledge and wisdom to spread through the system in ways that really support us to achieve the overall objectives that we're working towards together.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate this call and others like it for.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to interacting with the S3 community because I wonder how far we can push things in the sense of when we, like, you said, like, you make these videos, we don't know, maybe it will actually become more popular, but I mean, the video is out there now, and it's no effort for us anymore, because now once it's out there, it's out there. But if things start interacting on that, are we capable of creating other interfaces that allow us to funnel it in such a way that we can actually provide the best for the S3 community? That's a challenge I'm very interested in, and definitely a talk we should do later on, because I can see it forking in so many directions. But okay, we're not done talking. That's clear.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, Mixel. Well, thank you so much, and we'll schedule another conversation soon.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have a nice day. Bye.